literary princess, and today we are talking about Shakespeare. This is the Shakespeare Journey Tag, and I'm putting these down because they are extremely heavy. So I was tagged by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. She is one of the 3 hosts of Shaktember, an event where in September you read Shakespeare. I will be participating. I have not participated as of yet because I have not read any Shakespeare yet this month, but my next classic that is up to read is Twelfth Night. So this tag has 11 questions. Let's jump in. Question 1. What was your first experience reading Shakespeare and what was it like? So my first experience actually reading Shakespeare was in my first year of middle school. I had just moved to a new school, so this was for 6th grade. I would have been 11 years old, and we read Julius Caesar. And at this school, they actually had us read a Shakespeare play every year of middle school. So we read Julius Caesar in 6th grade, Hamlet in 7th grade, and King Lear in 8th grade. And I have to admit, my first experience actually reading Shakespeare was not very positive because my school used these no fear Shakespeare texts, which on one page has the original script, and then on the other has it translated into modern English. And they were having us read the modern one, the no fear one. And for Julius Caesar, I remember just not liking it that much and not really being interested because I was an 11-year-old who really cares about the politics of Rome as an 11-year-old. Maybe some people, it was not me. But what happened is in 7th grade, we got to Hamlet, and I was familiar with Hamlet, and we'll talk about why I was familiar with Shakespeare. And I got so mad because the no fear modern text translation of to be or not to be, that is the question, was to live or not to live, that is the issue. And I hated that so much. It made me so angry. I remember ranting about it to my mom. So I'm like this little 12-year-old in a freaking Catholic school uniform complaining, to live or not to live, that is the issue. That's not Shakespeare. Because if I knew what Shakespeare was. But the reason I was familiar with Shakespeare is largely due to the TV show Wishbone that I watched as a child, which was this little dog that read literature and imagined himself into the leading roles. So I very distinctly remember watching the Romeo and Juliet episode of Wishbone, but I also had an aunt who was very into Shakespeare, and we'll talk more about her in a minute. So I knew that to live or not to live, that is the issue, was not what Shakespeare wrote. And I was kind of like, why are we bothering to read it if we're not going to actually read it? So once I finally got into high school, I read Shakespeare as Shakespeare is actually written, and I was considerably more impressed and happier with it. So yeah, first experience reading it wasn't great. I don't like those no fear Shakespeare editions. Your mileage may vary with that. For me, I was just like, no. Question number 2, has the reading of a Shakespeare play ever brought you to tears? No. Just reading it, no, has not brought me to tears. I'm trying to think if I cried during any of the performances I have seen. I don't think I have, because the performances I've seen has been mostly comedies or histories. And the tragic ones weren't really super tragic, I guess, the way that I saw them performed. So no, Shakespeare has never actually brought me to tears. Question number 3, are there any people who have played a significant role in your Shakespeare journey? Yes, so this is where my aunt comes in again. This is my great aunt, the sister of my grandmother, and she is she's passed, was a very literature-oriented person. She's the one who got me into classics. So her and her husband, who was also very into Shakespeare, actually gave me my first complete works. This is the Art in Shakespeare. There's a very lovely note for Beth, because that's what my family calls me. Love, Aunt Pat and Uncle Paul, Christmas 2008. So sophomore year of high school. And they gave me this because I had actually been asking to borrow Shakespeare plays from Paul's collection. He had this really cute set of little mini Shakespeare plays. And I had gotten into it because of another person that was important in my Shakespeare journey, and I'm putting this down because it's really heavy. And that person was my freshman year English teacher. So first year of high school. She assigned us 3 plays: Romeo and Juliet, The Merchant of Venice, and The Taming of the Shrew. And it was through her that I realized I really liked Shakespeare. So Aunt Pat, Uncle Paul, Mrs. F, I'm not going to say her real name because that's weird. And then my other person would be my professor from undergraduate, who I guess I will call Professor D. She taught early modern literature. She taught a whole course on Shakespeare, and I had an absolute blast in her class and just so much fun. I learned so much. So those are kind of the 4 people that were significant in my Shakespeare journey. Question number 4, do you have a favorite book or film about Shakespeare? And you know what, I actually don't. I have not seen Shakespeare in Love. Yeah, I know, okay. Yeah, I know. I've seen the final scene of it, but I've never seen the rest of it. And I don't think I have actually ever read a book that was about Shakespeare himself. I have read lots of his plays. I've read lots of criticism of his plays. I have seen movies of his plays, but I have never actually read or watched something that was just about him. So yes, I should watch Shakespeare in Love. I know, I'm aware. I do also want to read Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. Oh, they're right here. Which is about Shakespeare and his wife and his children and their son who passes away, that ultimately I believe leads to the writing of Hamlet. But I have not gotten around to it. So I don't have an answer for this, sorry. Question number 5, which character in Shakespeare most resembles you and in what way? So like, everybody wants to say Beatrice for this, right? From Much Ado About Nothing. Like, I want to think that I'm witty and sharp and just a badass. And I am witty and sharp, not with other people though, like in the privacy of my house. So realistically, I'm not that much like Beatrice. I'm probably more like Hero, who is Beatrice's cousin, who is standing up ready to marry this guy, and then somebody says some horrible rumor about her and she just falls down like she's dead. And they all think she's dead. That's me. Just falls down dead at the first sign of difficulty. Hi. Yeah, we all want to be Beatrice, but sometimes you're just Hero. Question number 7, what actor throughout history would you most like to have seen play Hamlet while in his prime? I'll take seeing anyone play Hamlet. I've only seen 2 people play Hamlet. The guy in the 1996 movie, whose name I'm not remembering, and then a guy at Williams College, where I went to their student production of Hamlet, who's actually quite good. Let's see. I would have loved to see David Tennant play Hamlet, Benedict Cumberbatch as well. For some older folks, I think it would have been great to see Sir Ian McKellen play Hamlet. And then another one that would be really cool, it's more historical, would be Sarah Bernhardt, who was a Victorian actress who cross-dressed and played Hamlet. So that would be pretty fun. But yeah, honestly, I'll just take anyone as Hamlet. If I could see another production of Hamlet, I'd be quite happy. Question number 8, deliver your favorite speech or soliloquy from a Shakespeare play. Get my Norton Shakespeare out. This was given to me by one of my professors. It was a desk copy, and she was like, I already have this. Do you want it? I was dog sitting for her. I was like, okay, sure. This speech is from the very first act and scene of Richard III. It is the opening speech. It is Richard's soliloquy. And I really like this. I was like, going back and forth, like, which ones do I want to do? Because I could technically do Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. I actually had to memorize that one in high school. So I know that one pretty well, but I'm like, everyone's gonna do To Be or Not to Be. I thought about Lady Macbeth. I also thought about one of the ones from Margaret of Anjou, from the Henry VI cycle, or from Richard III. But ultimately, I really like Richard's opening speech here. So, she'll read this, and please keep in mind, I am not an actor, and I am also not wearing my glasses, so I can't really see that well. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass. I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty, to strut before a wanton ambling nymph. I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why I, in this weak piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun, and descent on mine own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain, and hate the idle pleasure of these days. Plots have I laid, inductions dangerous, by drunken prophecies, libels, and dreams, to set my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate, the one against the other. And if King Edward be as true and just as I am subtle, false, and treacherous, this day should Clarence closely be mewed up about a prophecy which says that G of Edward's heirs the murderer shall be. Such a great opening speech. It lays out everything. Like, okay, here's what happened. We were at war. Now we're not. We won. But I have this deformity and I can't be happy, so I'm gonna be a dick, basically. I got to see Richard III performed as part of a whole production of The Wars of the Roses, which is an adaptation of the Henry VI and Richard III cycle. And Richard was played by Robert Sheehan, who is from the TV show Misfits, and also, I believe, Umbrella Academy. And he was so marvelous. He did a great job with this speech. That was such a fun time. So I have a real soft spot for this speech because it reminds me of this really wonderful trip that I got to take to London, but also it's just a good speech, and Richard III is one of my favorite plays. Question number 9. Do any of Shakespeare's plays intimidate you? If yes, what play and why? No. At this point in my life, like, I've got a master's in English under my belt. I'm doing a PhD in English. I'm just used to Shakespeare by now. I've been reading him since I was 11 years old. I'm 30 now. It's just like an everyday part of life for me to be dealing with Shakespeare. So I find that I'm not intimidated at all by any of his plays. I guess I would say that before I had my undergrad, I would have been more intimidated by his history plays because they seemed kind of dry to me at that point in my life, but I'm not intimidated by them now anymore. Actually, the Henry VI cycle and Richard III are some of my favorites, so no longer intimidated. Question number 10. What tips would you give to intimidated readers coming to Shakespeare for the first time? So, get a good edition would be my first thing. An edition that you like and feel comfortable with, that has notes that you find helpful and that you understand. There are so many different editions. So, like, basically every publisher of classics has one. Oxford, Penguin, Norton, all of them. So look for one that has the type of style of notes that you find helpful, as well as possibly an introduction that you find helpful. I would also say to find an adaptation, like a film adaptation, or a filmed stage version to kind of read along with, or to watch first and then read the play, because that will give you kind of context to help you figure out what's going on. Because sometimes with this language, if you're unfamiliar with it, you're like, what is happening here? But if you see somebody acting it out and doing actions to go with it, you can figure out more, okay, here's what's happening. And the final tip I would give would be one that, oh my goodness, I can't remember who said this, if it was a professor or someone, but it is actually easier to understand tragedies than comedies for a modern reader. And that's because tragedy has pretty much remained the same over the years. Like, yeah, somebody dies, that's tragic. You're supposed to cry. Okay, I get that. Whereas comedy can be kind of harder because with the language, it's harder to get the jokes. So I do think that starting with a tragedy, finding an adaptation of it that is good, and making sure you have a good edition is kind of the key things. And question number 11, which is your favorite Shakespeare play and why? I love Much Ado About Nothing. That's definitely one of my favorite comedies because Beatrice is a queen. Love her, absolutely love her. I also really love the Henry VI cycle, and I think that's kind of controversial. I've heard so many people, even people that love Shakespeare, they're like, oh my god, the Henry VI plays. I'm like, no, they're amazing, leave them alone, because Queen Margaret of Anjou is my girl, okay? Yes, she's a villain in the plays, it's fine, she's wonderful, she's got some great speeches, she was also just a great actual historical figure. I did a whole project on her. And so to go along with that, I also love Richard III. I did a whole project on the Henry VI plays and Richard III, so I have a big soft spot for it. Plus, I saw the whole thing performed live, so I'm like, I really love it. And then, I don't really know what would be my favorite of the actual tragedies, though. I feel like I haven't read them in ages, and the only one I've seen performed is Hamlet. So I do like Hamlet, but I feel like everybody likes Hamlet. But yeah, Much Ado About Nothing, Henry VI, and Richard III. So I'm not going to tag anyone because I don't know who's been tagged already, nor do I know who reads Shakespeare as opposed to doesn't read Shakespeare. But if you think that this sounds like a fun tag to do, you can consider yourself tagged by me. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.